Somewhere in your life there's a list, a grocery list, a to-do list, a note you left yourself, a text message, an email, a contract, a receipt. You interact with written language so constantly, so automatically, that you have almost certainly never stopped to ask where it came from. Not in the abstract sense of the ancient Egyptians had hieroglyphics, in the specific sense of who actually did it first. Who was the first human being to pick up something sharp, press it against something flat, and make a mark that meant something? The answer is not a poet. It is not a philosopher. It is not a priest recording sacred wisdom for future generations. The first person who invented writing was almost certainly an accountant. And what they wrote down was not a prayer, not a story, not a law. It was a list of how much beer had been delivered to a temple in the city of Uruk, in what is now southern Iraq, approximately 5,400 years ago. That is the beginning of human literacy. A beer invoice, carved into a piece of clay by someone whose name we will never know, for a purpose so mundane that it would not merit a second glance in any modern office. And the fact that this is how writing began, not in a moment of spiritual inspiration, not in a flash of philosophical insight, but in the grinding practical necessity of keeping track of inventory, changes everything we think we know about what civilization actually is and why it actually exists. Writing was not invented because humans wanted to express themselves. Writing was invented because humans had more stuff than they could remember. Before we talk about the invention of writing, we need to understand what the world looked like without it. Because the absence of writing is not the same as the absence of knowledge. And the people who lived without it were not living in an informational vacuum. For the vast majority of human existence, the first 295,000 years or so of our 300,000-year history, all human knowledge was stored in exactly one place: human memory. Not books, not clay tablets, not papyrus. The accumulated knowledge of the entire species lived inside the heads of living people, and when those people died, whatever they had not managed to pass on died with them. This sounds terrifying from a modern perspective, but it worked. It worked for an almost incomprehensible span of time, across every environment on Earth, through ice ages and droughts and migrations and catastrophes of every kind. The oral tradition, the systematic transmission of knowledge through story, through song, through ritual repetition, is one of the most powerful information storage and retrieval systems ever developed. Aboriginal Australians encoded detailed navigational information across thousands of kilometers of landscape into songs called songlines, information accurate enough to navigate by, preserved for over 50,000 years without a single written word. The Iliad and the Odyssey were oral compositions, performed from memory by trained specialists for centuries before anyone thought to write them down. Human memory, trained and structured and embedded in community practice, is extraordinarily capable. The limitation is not capacity. The limitation is scale. You can remember everything that matters to a group of 50 people. You cannot remember everything that matters to a city of 50,000. And around 5,000 years ago, in the river valleys of Mesopotamia, human settlements crossed a threshold. They became too large, too complex, too densely interconnected for any individual memory or any collection of individual memories to track. The city needed a new kind of memory, and somebody invented one. The earliest writing system we have ever found is called proto-cuneiform, and it was discovered in the ruins of the ancient city of Uruk in what is now southern Iraq. The tablets date to approximately 3,400 BC. They are small. You could hold one in your palm. Made of clay, covered in impressed marks that look nothing like the elegant hieroglyphics most people associate with ancient writing. They look like accounting ledgers. Because that is exactly what they are. The marks on these tablets record quantities of specific goods, grain, oil, animals, beer, associated with specific institutions, primarily temples, which in ancient Sumerian society functioned as the economic heart of the city. The temple received goods, distributed goods, employed workers, managed land. And in a city the size of Uruk, which at its peak had a population of perhaps 50,000 people, making it the largest city on Earth at the time, tracking all of that in human memory alone was simply no longer possible. The solution was elegant in its simplicity. Press a reed into wet clay. Make a mark that stands for a quantity. Make another mark that stands for a commodity. Press the clay with a seal that identifies the institution. Let it dry. You have now created an external memory, a record that exists outside any human head, that can be read by anyone trained to read it, that will outlast the person who made it by thousands of years if stored correctly. The first writing was not phonetic. It did not represent sounds. It represented things directly. A picture of a cow meant a cow. A picture of grain meant grain. A number meant a quantity. Early writing was a notation system for the physical world, not a representation of spoken language. The idea that you could write down what someone said, that writing could capture speech, came later, much later, and it required a fundamental conceptual leap that was not obvious at all. Across the ancient world, writing appears to have been invented independently at least 3 times. In Mesopotamia, around 3400 BC. In Egypt, around 3200 BC, possibly influenced by Mesopotamian contact. In China, around 1200 BC. And possibly in Mesoamerica, where the Olmec and later Mayan writing systems developed independently of all of the above. Each time, the initial purpose was the same: administration, record-keeping, accounting, the management of goods and labor at a scale that exceeded human memory. Every single one of the oldest written texts ever found is a receipt, an inventory list, or a labor record. Not one of them is a poem. Not one of them is a prayer. The muse of the first writing was not inspiration. It was bureaucracy. Here is where the story becomes genuinely extraordinary. Because writing did not just give humans a new way to store information. It changed what information was. It changed what knowledge was. It changed what the human mind itself was capable of. Before writing, an argument could not exist beyond the people having it. A law existed only as long as someone remembered it. A mathematical calculation could not be checked because the moment you stopped performing it, it was gone. History was whatever the most recent generation remembered being told. The past was fluid, malleable, subject to the distortions of memory and the pressures of the present. Writing made things fixed. A contract written in clay could be appealed to 50 years later by people who were not present when it was made. A law carved in stone was the same law for everyone who could read it, regardless of what any particular official chose to remember. A mathematical calculation written down could be checked, corrected, built upon, which is why mathematics as a formal discipline was impossible before writing and exploded in sophistication almost immediately after it. The philosopher Walter Ong called this transformation the technologizing of the word. Writing took something that had existed only as sound, only as performance, only as a living act between people in the same place at the same time, and made it into an object, a thing, something that could be stored, transported, copied, disputed, studied, and used by people who would never meet the person who created it. This is so fundamental to the way modern humans think that it is almost impossible to fully appreciate from inside it. The very concept of an argument that has evidence, the idea that you can prove something by pointing at a record, is a product of writing. The concept of historical accuracy, that there is a correct version of the past that can be determined by examining sources, is a product of writing. The concept of a self that has consistency over time, a self that can be held accountable for what it said or agreed to years ago, is, in significant part, a product of writing. You think the way you think, in part, because 5,400 years ago someone in Mesopotamia needed to keep track of beer deliveries and pressed a reed into clay. Here's where we land. Writing is the most consequential technology in the history of our species, not the wheel, not fire, not agriculture. Writing. Because writing is the technology that allowed every other technology to be built upon, that allowed knowledge to accumulate across generations rather than resetting with every death, that allowed civilization to reach a scale and complexity that no human memory could have managed alone. And it began with a beer invoice. The person who invented it did not know they were inventing something that would still be in use 5,400 years later. They did not know they were creating the foundation for literature, for law, for mathematics, for science, for everything you are reading right now. They were trying to solve a specific problem in a specific city on a specific day. How much grain did the temple receive this week? How many jars of oil were distributed? How many workers were paid, and how much did each one receive? These are not romantic questions. They do not feel like the questions that launch civilizations, but they are exactly the questions that did. Because civilization, at its core, is not poetry. It is coordination. It is the management of shared resources and shared obligations at a scale that exceeds what any individual can hold in their head. And writing is what made that coordination possible at the scale that produced everything else. The Epic of Gilgamesh, the oldest story ever written, the tale of a king confronting mortality and seeking immortality, was written in cuneiform on clay tablets. It was written in the same script that recorded grain deliveries. by the same trained specialist who spent their days tracking beer rations. In the same city where the first accounting ledger was pressed into clay, the accountant and the poet shared a script. They were doing the same thing with the same tool for entirely different reasons. And between them, they created the world you live in. That's all for today. Please donate or subscribe to fund the next video.